nearest and brightest stars lab, what we're doing is making an HR diagram. This is a very important tool for astronomers to kind of categorize, organize where stars are in their life cycle. And so in this lab, we're comparing the stars that are the nearest to us and the stars that are the brightest in our sky, and trying to look to see if there are similarities and differences. Now, you've probably seen kind of the answers to this when you went through the HR diagrams activity, because you got to explore the nearest and brightest stars in the HR diagram explorer. But now you're going to work with some real data. The spreadsheet will eventually, hopefully, look like this. This is the completed version, and what your graph should look like. These are the nearest stars. These are the brightest stars. You're going to fill in these three columns of data: luminosity, temperature, radius for the brightest stars, and luminosity, temperature, radius for the nearest stars. The formulas that you'll need are in the document, so it should walk you through that. So for example, for luminosity, you type this formula into Excel: equals 10 raised to the power of E5. Okay, so that's this cell, equals 10 raised to the power of E5. You type that in here, and you can drag the formula down, and it will update the luminosities for all of these columns. Okay, now when you transfer over to the nearest stars, you do have to change the formula a little bit, and hopefully you can see what it's doing. So this is taking the number in cell E5. Let me click back over. This is taking the number in the cell E5 and raising it into the exponent of 10. So over here, what you want to do is replace cell E5 with cell N5, because that's where the luminosity data is. What we're given, what I was able to look up for these stars, was the logarithm of the luminosities. So we need to undo the logarithm, which means raising it into the exponent of 10. So you do that is raised to the power of N5 in this case. For temperature, we want to measure relative to the sun also. We have the temperatures over here. The temperature of the sun is given in two places, so it's 5840, and then it's also 5840 over here. So what you do for this is you take the cell where the temperature is, the absolute value of the temperature, and you divide it by you divide it by 5840, and then drag it down. Okay. Now the last column we need to address, and then the same thing would be over here for temperature. But now instead of using these temperature data, you'll use these temperature data for the nearest stars. The last one is the radius, and this is probably the most complicated one. Radius is related to luminosity and temperature for the stars. When stars get bigger, or let's look at it from the perspective of brightness. What could make a star brighter? Well, you could make it hotter, or you could make it bigger. Either one of those things could have an increasing effect on how bright the star appears. So the three variables here, luminosity, temperature, and radius, are all related. And this is the formula. So radius relative to the radius of the sun is the square root of L over L sun divided by T over T sun to the fourth power. So here we plug in the formula, square root F5 over G5 to the fourth power. F5 is the luminosity, G5 is the temperature. And again, drag that formula down, and it will calculate it for each row. Okay, and you're doing the same thing over here. Instead of using these luminosities and temperatures, you're using these luminosities and temperatures. So once you have the tables like this, you should be able to answer any of the questions you need to in the lab handout. You'll make the graph. You can make it look nice, as I have, by putting labels on it. And note that this is a logarithmic scale, so I changed the scale to logarithmic here. And then I put a legend, so the nearest and brightest stars are labeled, and a title to the graph. One other thing I'd like to show you is it'll ask you about like what is the hottest star in the group or what is the brightest star in the group. You can figure out those things by sorting the table. Now, it's important that you highlight the whole table before you sort it. Otherwise, it will just sort what you highlighted. So I want to highlight all of the data here, and I can sort it. So if I want to know what is the biggest star among the brightest stars, what's the biggest star, I can custom sort by the column r over our sun, so the radius. And let me go from largest to smallest. I want the biggest one at the top. Okay, and so now I can tell that the biggest star of the brightest stars in our sky is Betelgeuse, right there. Okay, and you could do a similar thing for temperature or luminosity. Just sort the table however you want. Just remember to highlight the entire table when you do that. Okay, if you have any questions on this lab that I wasn't able to answer in this little video, then